DfT's 2020 T-Trig programme. So why are we here today? Today is all about guiding you, our potential T-Trig applicants, in scoping and completing your application. So here's the agenda. I'm delighted to be joined by my co-host, James Tickler, the man at the Department for Transport who is behind T-Trig. You'll hear from James a bit later on. I will be taking you through some key points in the application process, and then we'll explore the scope of the open call and the challenge areas in more detail. Also, at the end of the event, there will be a Q&A session. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the webinar to ask any questions you may have. We will endeavour to answer as many questions as we can during the event itself. But if we don't get around to answering your question, don't worry, we will gather them all up and then respond to them later on. So first up, without further ado, we're going to hear from Professor Phil Blythe, the DfT's Chief Scientific Advisor. Sadly, Phil couldn't be here today in person, but he did want to share the following message with you.
Hello, good afternoon everyone. I'm sorry I can't be here today in person, but I wanted to say a few words to you anyway. I just wanted to welcome the SMEs, the academic researchers and innovators from all corners of the UK who are on this call. You're at the forefront of creating new solutions in transport and put them into practice. That's really important for me. My challenge has always been to the department to make sure we are innovative and using leading edge ideas to solve our transport problems. And I see T-Trig as being a key part of that. So bringing the innovators together, challenging them to bid for our programme, I think is really, really important. I really believe that transport has enormous potential to be a shop window for the UK and our industrial strategy to help us build a better, more competitive and productive Britain and solving the transport challenges that we have now and those going into the future, such as decarbonisation, for example. And as you know, DfT works very closely with the CPC and other partners in the research and innovation ecosystem to help create the best environment for transport innovation. And this means it's not just about the funding. I know that's important, but it's about the wider support that being part of the T-Trig programme and the support of the CPC can have. It's the access to collaboration, supply chains, expertise, and so on, and also the people that own the problems back at the department. Supporting projects can lead to new demonstrations and demonstrators and create new markets. And that's important. And also about developing standards, new tools, and other things that help the sector move on. You know, do we need to change regulation? Do we need new regulations to make these new innovations safe and usable in the transport sector? And only you can tell us by doing the demonstration, the experimentation for us. And really, that's my offer to the SMEs. Provide you with funding via T-Trig, but also the broader support whilst working in partnership with the CPC. But I think there's even more to it than that. It's about helping SMEs engage with the DfT to understand DfT's priorities and the challenges that we have. Because I think sometimes in government, we're not very good at telling the outside world what our challenges are, what we're thinking, and what you could do to help us and innovate for us so we don't have to do it ourselves, which I'm all in favour of. And also, you know, it helps you engage with the decision makers, those that really understand the problem but don't understand the leading edge solutions and innovations that can come out to solve that. And together, I think we can make our transport networks better, certainly. And it's also about helping to build the right capability and capacity to deliver transport for the future. I know CPC are very passionate about that with some of the programs they have, and to help the SME find routes and pathways to bring their innovation to reality. So it's about enabling markets, breaking down barriers, which really prevent innovation from playing its full role. And as part of that, you know, my Transport Research and Innovation Board are looking at how we can make sure that innovation is brought more effectively into procurement, so that when we have projects, we recognise the value of the innovation, even if it may mean the project costs that little bit more. I was very pleased that we had the Minister for the Future of Transport, Rachel McLean, launch T-Trig earlier this month She's become a real champion for T-Trig and for innovation in SMEs in general, and she recognises the massive contribution they can have in delivering our future transport systems. This year is actually our 11th year or 11th funding round for SMEs through T-Trig across many technologies and modes. The fact that the Minister was able to prioritise her time to launch T-Trig within a busy schedule, particularly around the spending review time, really illustrates clearly the value of T-Trig and also the value of what it does in terms of feeding the wider innovation ecosystem and the ideas and the opportunities for entrepreneurs to influence transport of the future. T-Trig was one of the first things I set up when I came in as CSA in 2015. And I've always been a big fan because I know there are innovations out there that don't get enough noise to enable people to listen to them and say, oh, that's interesting. But I've seen the results of T-Trig make a difference on the ground. I've seen some of the T-Trig projects be grabbed and funded significantly to go to the next stage of deployment, demonstration, and commercialization by companies like Google and Virgin, for example. And I think one of the best things about T-Trig is a variety of technologies and ideas that come out, and the variety of problems that they come and solve. Some of the problems we didn't even know we had until you guys told us what they were. And it's a pleasure to see people walk through those journeys, and also I think recognise that the sort of TRL levels, technology readiness levels that we support in T-Trig is something that no one else really funds, and I think that's really important. And certainly the policy teams and the modal teams within the department recognise that. When we tell them that we're going to do another competition, they chase us down, chase James down in particular, and say, look, we want to be involved in that. We recognise the value of it, and here's the money so we can have maybe a bespoke call in our area. And that's worked very, very well in the past across the whole raft of areas such as cycling and decarbonisation and security and many, many others. And we recognise the value of it and really push forward with that. I recently met Dame Ottoline Laser, the new CEO of UKRI, and we were talking about innovation and engagement with SMEs across the TRL levels, from the stuff that EPSLC does at the low TRL levels to the stuff that goes through Innovate UK at the higher TRL levels, and then beyond that to making products and commercialization. And she recognised that the TRL levels that T-Trig's aimed at are really, really important to fill that gap in the TRL levels where there really isn't any funding at the moment. She was clear that she'd like to see more of this funding going on in other sectors as well. So that's enough from me. It's really up to you to go through the process now and come up with those great ideas, which I look forward to hearing about when you submit them to the department and the CPC. But before I sign off, I'd like to offer a big thanks to you all and to Rebecca and the team at the CPC for all their hard work on bringing the T-Trig together and the T-Trig event together. And also, for the first time, the other sister Trigs that we have launched in specific areas. So I'd like to thank you all again for your time, your precious time. I recognise it's a very busy time for everybody in showing interest in T-Trig. Good luck with your applications and your innovation journey, and I look forward to seeing the results of your thinking around this. And you know that you have support of the DFT and my science team in making these happen and making these work. Thank you.
I think you might be on mute, Bex. I think we've potentially lost Bex for the moment. I'm hoping you can hear me. Thank you for great to see Phil saying some words about T-Trig. We will get Bex back later to talk to you about the application process. I will talk to you a little bit about T-Trig. As Phil and Rebecca kindly introduced me, I lead on T-Trig for DFT. This is now my third T-Trig. I'm very excited about it. I haven't quite been involved as long as Phil, but great to see currently 144 of you logged in today, interested in T-Trig and working with us. So this is what Phil didn't mention. This is sadly his last call because he'll be leaving us in May. So we're very keen to make it bigger and better than before. And it's really, we should also be passing the milestone of our 200th project in this call that we funded, which is also absolutely great. As Phil alluded to, T-Trig is unique in supporting grassroots innovation across all of transport, and it focuses on that proof of concept step where you have an idea, you don't know whether it's going to work, and you need a bit of help to either demonstrate that it doesn't work and fail fast, or demonstrate that it does, and then go on to the next steps in your journey. So we're looking for new ideas rather than incremental improvements or sort of demonstrations of existing products. We want it to be a real question as to whether something works or not, and to answer it with our support. And the benefits of T-Trig are really clear to the department. It lets us influence innovation and lets us help support beneficial innovation, socially equitable innovation come into being rather than just what the market sees as profitable. And for you guys, I hope the benefits are just as clear. You know, you have not just funding, as Phil mentioned, but also the support of CPC and the DFT Office for Science in your corner to help you take those next steps, to help you make new connections and to build businesses around successful ideas. And we've had great successes in T-Trig over the years. There's certainly the variety and the variability that we see in T-Trig is one of its great strengths. We've had navigation beacons to help visually impaired people get around stations. We've had train wheels that negate the difficulties presented by snow and ice. We've had drones that can automatically avoid collisions. We've even had some zany ideas, including mushrooms to grow on embankments to soak up nitrogen oxides, and just a great spectrum of different ideas. As Phil mentioned, we had the Minister open T-Trig earlier in the month, and as both the technology minister within DFT, but also formerly someone who led a startup. She's super passionate about T-Trig and super excited about what it can do and how it can help UK companies take part in this transport revolution we're seeing at the moment. And and I think that's going to be me. I think I've said enough for the moment. I will pass back over to Bex if we can get her. Can we hear you, Bex?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Oh, thank goodness. Working fine all morning, and then at the crucial moment, it decides to stop working. So I'm so sorry about that. Thanks for that, James. What I was trying to say before is that sort of a key point that Phil alluded to was that although T-Trig does offer, of course, a £30,000 grant for R&D, really the priceless thing around T-Trig is the sort of support you get following on from your research project, both from the Catapult and the Department for Transport itself, and that in itself really is the priceless thing. It's that collaboration, it's that enablement and the commercialization, and I think that's what makes T-Trig sort of extra special and really unique. So that was the point I was trying to make when my internet's not working. So let's move on. So my segment is talking to you guys about the application process in general. There are some sort of tips that I wanted to take you through. So as James sort of already alluded to, we're offering grants of up to £30,000 for sort of research and early stage feasibility projects that fall within our open call and also our 2 challenge areas, decarbonisation and COVID-19 recovery. A point here is that your projects can cost more than £30,000 in its entirety, but anything over £30,000 you will have to put in yourself. So you'll, in the application form in the project finance section, you'll just have to specify that £30,000 or however much you're requesting from T-Trig, and the rest of the project budget you're going to be putting in. And then it's also important to justify what exactly you want T-Trig to pay for. In terms of filling out the application form itself, this year we're doing something slightly different. In a bid to digitise our application process, we're using a platform called S6S. It's an online forum for the completion of grant funded proposals. It's our first time using it, and I'd like to really just say thank you to everybody who's been in touch to offer us some feedback on the platform, because it's been hugely helpful to us. We have experienced some issues, especially in terms of uploading documents, but these should all have been resolved now, and you're welcome to upload documents in either Excel, Word or PDF formats. For section 2 of the application, this is the bulky section where we need, it's the questions around challenge and innovation, exploitation. You now can upload diagrams, figures and images that would be in support of your application under this section. If you're still experiencing problems with F6S, please either leave a comment on the F6S forum, which will go directly to me. You can email the T-Trig inbox, or you can email F6S support directly. Another point is that your application will be auto-saved as you go along. So you can complete bits of it at a time and then leave it and come back and visit it as often as you like before you finally press submit. In terms of the supporting documentation, there are some documents that are available on the T-Trig website, which is hosted on the Connected Places Catapult website. And these documents, it's really important that you read through all of them before you start completing your application. So I'll just go through them briefly. The application guidance. This is your T-Trig Bible. It sets out everything you need to know, from how to frame your answers and what we're looking for exactly, to the funding schedules and intellectual property rights and key deadlines and things like that. So it's quite likely that if you have any questions, they will be answered in that document. The grant agreement is the next document, and these are the boring terms and conditions, which I would suggest you do read through carefully before you apply. The grant specification is the document that sets out the scope for both challenge areas and for the open call. So in this document, we've listed examples of the types of projects that we're interested in, but please note these are not complete lists. They're just designed to give you an indication of some of the things that we're looking to fund. The major point that I want you to go away with here is, if you have a great idea, as James says, even if you think, oh, that sounds a bit wacky, we'd really rather you just submitted it to us, and then we can decide if we want to take it forward or not. And if you'd like some some advice about whether you think it might be in scope, please contact us, and we're happy to discuss your project and let you know what we think. And finally, on the website, there is a privacy notice pertaining to the handling of your personal data. So in terms of the application itself, the key points that I just wanted to reiterate, there are 4 key points. So the utmost, most important point: your resulting technology that comes out of your research must be novel or innovative. So what do we mean by this? This doesn't mean necessarily that it's the first of a kind ever product of this nature anywhere that anyone's developed in the whole world. That's not what necessarily we mean. If there isn't one of these things already in the market, there could be a reason why there isn't. It just has to be a new approach or a novel element to an innovative idea that already exists. So in addition, it could be something like, what is it about the expertise of your team, your company, that makes you innovative and unique and makes you the best entity to develop this and commercialize this? What is it about your branding that's innovative? For example, connected and autonomous transport, that's pretty innovative, but everyone's trying to fight for a piece of that market. So that's innovative in itself. But what is it about your approach that is different? So the other big aspect of innovation is impact. So your technology you must be able to anticipate this will have a positive impact for UK transport. That's really, really important. Social impact, economic impact, environmental impact, it has to impact somehow positively. The third crucial point is that it must respond to a market challenge or a problem that currently exists. And please do refer here to the DFT priorities and or the industrial strategy grand challenges, because that will strengthen your application. The fourth point is, and the fourth and final point, although the grant very much funds research and proof of concept work, feasibility work at the early TRL, you must have an idea of your exploitation plan, or that you must have a clear route to market. So this doesn't just fund a one-off piece of research that's going to be, published in a brochure that's going to sit on a shelf somewhere. We need to be able to see that you've thought about where to take this after your research plan, your research project has been carried out. And in many ways, this is where the Catapult does come in offering some support to commercialise. But in order for your project to be successful, we need to see that you've already set the wheels in motion and that you're equipped to be able to commercialise this and you have a plan. They're the 4 key points that I would consider in your application. So just some other general points. Please do remember to keep within the word counts of the questions. Please write in layman's terms, avoid acronyms and obscure jargon. The way I like to describe it is pretend you're explaining your technology on a poster that's going to go on the side of a bus shelter. So the normal person walking past has got to read it, digest it, understand the value proposition and the impact and what this technology is going to do at a consumer level. I have had a few queries about state aid, so I'll quickly touch on that. I just wanted to clarify this grant is part of your de minimis state aid allowance, which is £200,000 over 3 years. If you are successful in securing funding, you'd need to complete a de minimis declaration stating that the grant won't take you over your allowance, which we will help you and provide you with that documentation. Finally, applications must be submitted by midnight on Sunday, the 11th of October 2020. That is the deadline. And if you have any further questions, I'm sure I've probably not covered absolutely everything, but please put them in the chat and I'm happy to answer them in the Q&A. So now I will hand back over to James, who will take us through the scope of our open call.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Bex. Hopefully you all can hear me. We've started answering your questions on text, and some of those we'll pick up in the Q&A at the end of the session. So the open call is traditionally the heart of T-Trig. So this is where we talk to you a little bit about what our priorities are across all the modes and all technologies, but actually we're looking to you to suggest things that you think will help improve the transport system to us. So we know we don't have a monopoly on wisdom. There are some challenges that are closest to where we sit and we can see well, and there are others that we perhaps don't see as well. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing ideas that really sort of challenge my preconceptions about what's important and what can be done. And we've talked a little bit earlier about the sort of really great ideas we've had in the open call. As with the other calls of T-Trig, we're looking for new ideas, genuinely new things, and this can be a new idea full stop, or it can be an idea that's transposed into a new situation and used in a new way. That's still innovation, that's still novel, and we're still definitely interested. The open call this year is slightly smaller than it has been in previous years as a proportion of the total funding, but this just represents the dominance, certainly in our minds at the moment, of decarbonisation, and of course COVID, which you'll hear about from Asha in a few minutes. But if there's more detail in the T-Trig guidance document and the other documents available on the T-Trig website, but it really is for any kind of idea that you can argue will improve transport. And as Bex was saying, the more you can link it to sort of statements of intent from government, like the Clean Maritime Plan or industrial strategy or the transport decarbonisation, the future transport grand challenge, the better it'll see into our eyes and ears, because it will speak our language. So please do make an effort. There are loads of easy hooks you can pick up out there. Leveling up is obviously is a favourite one as well. So please, yeah, a little bit of effort there can really help your application sing and help us understand why and how it's going to be useful. So I think that's probably all I'm going to say about the open call. It's open to all technologies, all modes, and we're talking physical technologies, digital technologies, as long as you're able to articulate clearly how the project develops a new technology idea, tests it, and how it's going to be, how it's going to improve transport. We're interested. It's open. There you go. Bex, am I handing back to you now, I think?
Yes, just for a second. To welcome Asha, please. So Asha Lawrence Cole, who is the Head of Academic and International Engagements at the DFT's Office for Science, and Asha is here to talk us through the COVID-19 Recovery Challenge.
Thanks, Bex. Much appreciated that. Do we have my slides coming up? Brilliant. Okay, so I'm Asha. I'm going to talk you through what our priorities are in the COVID-19 space for innovation. Next slide, please. So it's often said that crisis drives innovation, and I think this is absolutely no different. This really is a time for innovation. It's an unprecedented crisis in modern times. I think that transport, as we've seen, is a central part of the economic infrastructure which has been impacted by COVID-19. The transport sector has been at the forefront of the COVID-19 response. We were the first sector to mandate face coverings, for example. So we can all see that transport can be a challenge during COVID-19, and there's some measures that have been taken, such as distancing, have an economic impact. So we want innovation in the transport sector to support the UK economy in recovery from this pandemic. So things that we're looking to maximise transport capacity. We're looking to enable safe reopening of the economy, and on a more fundamental level, to drive the UK to be a world leader in innovation against COVID-19. It's worth saying that there really is a huge opportunity in this space, and we want yourselves as the innovators to be at the forefront of that. So there's a couple of kind of points I'd like to make about what kind of innovation we're looking for. There's a lot of discussion at the moment about smart innovations, about really kind of intelligent ways of looking at things, new ways of looking at things. Often in some cases, there's not going to be a silver bullet, but maybe kind of rethinking some of the fundamental assumptions that the sector has that might help us in this situation. And also, there's been a lot of discussion about technology and hard tech. We're also really interested in the kind of behavioural elements of a lot of this. It does just everything that comes out of T-Trig doesn't have to be a physical device that's going to stop COVID-19. There's a lot more depth to this challenge than just that. And actually, something James said earlier really caught me. The question about whether something works here or not. Whether something works or not is a really challenging question at the moment. In the time of COVID-19, it's really key, and especially challenging. That's really an area for innovation, and being able to demonstrate the value of something is really very important. So, as I've said, our offer is really a link to policymakers. We're planning to, make sure that you guys have a good view of what the government priorities are for innovation, where you guys can really have a good impact, and make sure that you're linked in those successful bids. Would be working directly with my team and policymakers in supporting the recovery from COVID-19. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to briefly talk you through some of the challenges that we've seen that innovation can help with. It's a long list, but by no means exhaustive. And it should hopefully act as a spur for the imagination in some of the innovation that you guys are thinking about. So for a start, novel mitigations. What novel innovations can help ensure that transport can operate safely throughout COVID-19. I think it's a really key space. That one kind of covers off a lot of what we're talking about here. There's some more specific areas such as ventilation and filtration. We are all aware that aerosol has become more evident as a potential transmission route for COVID-19. So what can be done against this? One of the key kind of questions as we're moving into winter is how can we bring more fresh air? And that's the real advice from Sage, more fresh air. How can we do that whilst maintaining energy efficiency? So I suppose you've got a bit of decarb and COVID crossover there. Decontamination. Cleaning is one of the key recommendations from Sage of how to deal with COVID-19, one of the key mitigations. Is there any particularly efficient innovation for cleaning? Ensuring that not only any kind of surface is decontaminated, but maybe some of the dirt's taken off as well. And one particularly challenging thing, temperature screening is a challenging bit of technology. It doesn't necessarily do what we would hope for a kind of COVID-19 screening. We've all seen the newspaper articles recently about dogs being used for COVID-19 screening. But what else is there? What kind of other innovations can be used for screening against COVID-19? Thinking about what signatures there are of a COVID-19 infection that could be used for an innovation on screening. Next slide, please. So one of the key things is public perception on transport. How do we change that perception of public transport, ensuring that it's kind of clear that it is a safe way to travel? And also, what innovations can encourage active travel? Because actually, we all know that taking a walk is probably one of the safest ways to get around if you're talking about avoiding other people. So demand management, crowd control, optimizing passenger flow. There's been a lot of discussion about one-way systems as a potential mitigation for COVID-19. Is there a way to optimize passenger flow on transport to enable social distancing, which, as we all know, is absolutely key. Managing and monitoring transport capacity is a challenge. There's a lot of systems already in place, but is there a smart way we can do this at scale? And actually, how can we inform passengers that actually, maybe the next bus is really full, but the one after is going to be quite empty, and there's plenty of ability to social distance on that. And then increasing compliance and safety. How can we improve compliance with mandatory face coverings? There's a lot of different ways that are currently being done by transport. In fact, if you see there's the kind of 6 steps that have been published by the government. But how do we kind of encourage passengers through innovative means to do that? Is there a way to do that to encourage people to maintain distancing on transport, for example? Next slide, please. Finally, these guys are a little bit more on the kind of scientific or research side. Epidemiological modeling in transport is a really interesting area. Is there any innovation in this space that that you guys who are listening in have thought of, or is there any kind of way that we can improve our understanding of transport from an epidemiological perspective? Understanding transmission on transport is very challenging. What innovations could enable us to better study that, to better understand whether transport has had any clusters, that kind of whether there is a risk of transmission on transport? And finally, future-proofing public transport hubs and transport from contamination and transmission. We know that COVID-19 is happening now, but there's the potential for kind of future pandemics. What can be done which will enable both a response and recovery from COVID-19 and potentially prevent future pandemics having quite the same impact that COVID-19 has had? So I hope that's given you a bit of an overview of some of the ideas that we've had of where innovation can really have an impact on the transport sector. That's it from me. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Asha. So I've been busily going along the chat function, the Q&A, sorry, answering as many questions as I could during that. So we'll answer some more. But just before we do, can I hand it back to James, who is going to talk us through the decarbonising the transport system call?
Brilliant. Thanks, Bex, and also thanks, Asha, for joining us today to talk about COVID. So COVID is clearly the sort of the most pressing sort of big challenge we face at the moment in transport. But let's not forget we're also leaving the EU and also trying to decarbonise at the same time. And decarbonisation is this amazing, both profound and enduring challenge. Whereas we hope we'll be able to live with COVID relatively soon. I don't know how long it will take, but not too many months, hopefully. And equally, the sort of the fallout from the implications from leaving the EU and the opportunities should play out in the next maybe 5 years. Decarbonisation, we've got 30 years, and even though that sounds like a relatively long time, it is still a massive challenge to be able to achieve. And you know, transport, as with COVID, is front and center, being a quarter of the energy system, a third of the energy system in 2018, and also emitting roughly a quarter of all the emissions that life in the UK produces. So we know it's a massive challenge. We also know there's not going to be much offsetting available to transport. The amount of offsetting, as in sort of capturing carbon by growing trees or doing it industrially, is going to be reasonably limited. And we know that there are areas of the carbon budget that are even harder than transport. So some of land use, for example. So when people are queuing up to use that limited offset capacity, transport will not be at the front of the queue, and we are going to have to find solutions. So the challenge itself is, as I say, it's huge. We're going to have to turn over the whole of the road fleet, both domestic and commercial. We're going to have to finish decarbonising rail. So much of it is electric, but the rest is going to have to be either electric, or so I've just been joined by my cat here. Will either be electric or have batteries or be powered by hydrogen. We need to retrofit the whole of the marine fleet, provide decarbonised fuels at ports and the infrastructure to support that. And finally, we've got to pretty much redesign aviation from scratch. We'll need new airplanes with different shapes. We need new airports, and we also need to deal with the massive uncertainty in future aviation demand as so massive challenge. There's lots of detail of the areas of interest in the grant specifications. Please have a look. As Bex said earlier, they're not exhaustive. We've given some examples of areas that are sort of near the front of our minds and sort of very present to us now. But we're interested in anything that will help this massive challenge of decarbonisation. And as well as it being a sort of a national priority and very high importance to make happen as a transition, it's also a great opportunity for growth. You know, we have advanced and transport system of densely populated country, and we know that lots and lots of solutions that can be shown to work here can work elsewhere. So the export potential, the growth potential is brilliant. So really pleased to be able to offer the biggest chunk of the funding this year in this space, and really excited to see what will come back. In terms of what's in scope and out of scope, it's similar to the other calls. We're not looking for increments. We're not looking for existing products that are going to be demonstrated. We're looking for new ideas or using existing ideas in new ways. And we're also, when it comes to the energy system, there's an edge of scope there. So we know that transport and energy is very interconnected, but we don't want to fund ideas that pertain more to the energy system. So an electrolyzer for generating hydrogen would not be in scope. But if it was a specialised electrolyzer for use on the forecourt of a refuelling station, for example, that solved some forecourt specific challenges in some way, then that would be in scope. But if there are any other questions on decarbonisation and on what particularly around that scope question, please pop them in the chat, and we will happily pick them up later. Okay, I'm going to hand back to you now, Bex. That was decarb.
Lovely, thanks. I'm going to hand back to you, actually. Well, both of us, really. So we're going to sort of open up the Q&A and see how many questions we can just quickly breeze through. And awesome. Like I said, if we don't manage to answer your question right now, we will do in the fullness of time. So James, I think there was one you wanted to answer live about universities.
Yeah, absolutely. So someone who's logged in anonymously asked about, will universities be defined as SMEs? So T-Trig's open to all. The focus is SMEs, and we tend to think about SMEs a lot when we think about T-Trig, but it's definitely open to universities and to bigger companies for that matter. But you'll still need to be mindful of de minimis funding limits and stay within those state aid regulations. So as Beck said, you've got a limit of £200,000 over a 3-year rolling window. We know that state aid is part of the EU exit negotiations at the moment, and so the position on state aid may change. But what the sort of the guidance we've been given by the people in BEIS is that whatever replaces the current state aid regime, which is driven by EU rules, will likely be very, very similar, if not identical, to what we've got at the moment, because we'll still need to engage with some of the bigger international funding systems, which require rules of this type. So yeah, T-Trig open to all, and please be mindful of state aid.
James, on that, we had a few questions around in terms of eligibility and who can apply around overseas companies. So what about overseas companies who will establish themselves in the UK by the time the grant is won?
That's a great question, Rebecca. So the
sorry, it's not from me.
well, yeah, from our audience. So there has to be a UK lead. So you've got to have a UK. You've got to be a UK company as the lead bidder. Other bits can be contributed by other partners who can be outside the UK. That's fine. I think if you don't have a UK base now, I don't think you would be eligible to apply. If you're establishing one in the next 11 days, that might be possible, but probably tricky. If you want to talk about that more, happy to take that offline, talk about specifics, obviously.
So along that vein then, if you partner with a foreign or EU-based company, that would be okay as long as the UK-based company is the lead bidder.
Yeah.
So this is just another question that we've had from an anonymous attendee. So can the foreign company receive any funding from T-Trig?
They can, but not directly. So the grant funding agreement that you would receive would be between the Department for Transport and the lead bidder, and we would transfer the funds to the lead bidder. If they then transfer those subsequently to other partners, that's fine, as long as it's stated up front in the application and it's clear where the money's going fundamentally. But there's nothing wrong with that.
Great. Okay. So Naomi's asking if large companies can apply, but I believe you've already answered that, James, and said yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just have another look. Sorry, go on.
So we had a question about what are the most important things that we're looking for. I guess that's a bit of a £30,000 question. We're looking for lots of things fundamentally, and the breadth and variety of T-Trig is part of the core of T-Trig. I don't think if we've got an idea about decarbonising boats versus decarbonising cars, that won't be a comparison we'll be making. It'll be about what the potential impact of those two ideas are, how much they can help us face the challenge of decarbonisation. We've got a list in the guidance of things that we're interested in. Those are all good ideas in there, but as we said earlier, they're not exhaustive, and we'll consider everything basically.
Thank you, fantastic. I'm just going down some questions that are sort of saying similar things. So, can we use subcontractors from outside of the EU?
Yes, it's fine in principle. I think if so, at the end of the grant, you'll be asked to submit all your receipts to evidence how you spent the grant and assure us that you spent it properly. It can get very difficult if there's lots of foreign language receipts and foreign currencies. So any steps you can take to minimise that challenge for us in terms of administering the grant would be very much appreciated. But there's no fundamental barriers to doing that. Again, it has to be clear in the application who's doing what, where they are, etc., etc.
Great. Just to touch on timescales briefly, Diane's asking about timescales and when the projects can start. So, Diane, the idea is in a perfect world, if everything goes perfectly to plan, you will be starting the project in January and finishing in June.
Yeah.
Sorry,
picked up one from Helen Ma. Is it possible to elaborate a little more on the situation with carbon offsetting? Given that I sit in the science team in transport, I wouldn't want to give a policy answer for that. You know, there are various approaches to how we get to zero. It's definitely a net zero, so there will be some offsetting. You know, if you read around the subject of land use, we're going to have some real challenges in land use. Do we use land to grow trees? Are we growing vegetables? Are we still farming beef? Well outside of my scope, certainly something that interests me, but I think that's about as much as I can say about offsetting.
Thank you. Peter is asking about, so he has a very, very innovative idea, and he wants to explain it to us, but he just wants to do that knowing sort of with some reassurance that that's not going to be shared further. So could we maybe do this under NDA, James?
Possibly. I wouldn't want to commit necessarily, because we don't generally, as government, we don't generally sign NDAs. We're generally trusted, and we have agreements with the CPC that from our point of view should extend that trust to them, and they exist as a neutral broker within the market, and so they have to be able to handle information that is commercially sensitive or confidential. In terms of IP, we get lots of questions about IP. You know, we don't take any interest in the IP because we know that that's what a lot of SMEs, the value of a lot of SMEs is built around their special IP. What I would say is that the level of detail we're asking for in the application shouldn't really reveal any deep secrets. You know, the value of IP is often wrapped up in know-how and in people as much as a sort of a pre-patent sort of idea. So usually it is, you can make an application that gives us enough of an idea of what you're talking about to have some confidence that it's a really good idea and offer you some funding without giving away anything overly sensitive. I mean, I've certainly had this conversation with bidders in the past, and we've managed to get through it without anyone feeling upset or that we've not done the right thing. So I'd encourage you to have a go. If you really can't find a way of describing your idea without giving away something that you don't feel you can, we might be able to consider an NDA, but it would be in extremis.
Okay, we've got quite a lot of questions about the decarbonisation element, James. So let's touch on that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, I can see one from Kusha around autonomous mobility and decarbonisation. So autonomous mobility may have a decarbonisation impact. It also may not, because it depends quite a lot on sharing. Because if you're going to share an autonomous vehicle, it could be good for decarbonisation, certainly embedded carbon, because you're reusing that vehicle. If you're not sharing it, it can have the opposite impact. If everyone has their own autonomous vehicle that poodles around, picking them up from wherever they want to go, and then goes home to sort of have a rest or something, that'll actually use more energy or more fuel if it's not electric. So what I'd say is that it's arguable. It's probably better suited to the open call, but if you can say that your autonomy innovation will contribute to decarbonisation by reducing travel demand or reducing miles, yeah, that's within scope. That counts. But I think it's up to you to pick which call you go for.
Lovely, thank you. What about a project that reduces carbon emissions for diesel vehicles? Would that be eligible under the decarbonisation call? Or,
yeah, great question. Diesel's a bit of a dirty word in DFT. But having said that, we know that this 30-year transition we're not going to have an all-electric fleet tomorrow. We're talking about bringing forward that 2035 date at the moment to something earlier in the 2030s. There's still going to be diesel around. If there are ways of making diesel more efficient, then we certainly have funded those in the recent past, and we'll continue to do so. But if I think you need to be really clear what the decarbonisation benefit is, and be sure that it's not going to increase diesel usage.
Thanks. So what about a software solution to help the public or companies better understand their carbon footprint of the transport they're choosing to take?
Yeah, I think it's arguable. I mean, so there was another question about software, I think, as well. Yes, definitely. Software solutions count. They're still innovations, even if they're not sort of physical and don't have cogs and levers and things. So yeah, apps and software are certainly within scope. I think you need to show that it was transport relevant and that it was going to have a transport impact, and that's where you might struggle with a sort of a personal carbon counting app. But I think if you can satisfy yourself that you can argue that, then please do apply, and we'll have a look at it.
Okay, thanks, James. We're getting a lot of the same question. Is it possible to apply the same bid to two categories, or apply several times for the different challenges? So each individual application can only be submitted to one of the funding pools, although you can submit different bids under the different application call, the competition calls, if that makes sense. So you just need to, if you're making more than one application, you'll need to demonstrate that you have the infrastructure and the ability in place to deliver these projects concurrently.
Yes. So if we reached a scenario where you had two or more great ideas and we offered you funding for both, which has happened in the past, we'd be seeking some reassurance that you had the capacity to deliver both at the same time. But yeah, you can't put the same idea into more than one call. So there are places where these overlap. I think particularly between the theme calls and the open call, you'll have to make a judgment, afraid, on where that goes best. But if you have more than one idea, please make more than one application. That'd be great.
If Sanaka asks, if there is another lockdown or there's restrictions in place because of COVID, are we likely to be extending the project?
Yeah.
I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, great question, Sanaka. And we did that this year. So we ran a similar schedule. So we opened in the autumn. Projects were awarded in December and began in January. And I think 3 of the 30 that we funded in 2019 finished in June. We had a load in July. We had another load in August, and there are some still going now. Particularly, we had some projects delivered by universities where the universities had locked down hard and early, and then laboratories were closed all through the summer, and have only reopened in August. So people lost sort of 3 or 4 months of a 6-month project. So yeah, we'll definitely look at that in a sort of as constructive a way as we can.
Thank you. This is a really great question from Katie. She says that if the project crosses calls, or she's kind of maybe a bit unclear about which competition to apply under, is it possible to get advice on which of the most appropriate calls to apply for? And sorry, yeah, I'll answer that, Katie. Yes, it is possible. If you just email us at T-Trig@DFT, and we can certainly help you. And I suppose a follow-up question would be, James, if somebody applies, say, under the decarbonisation challenge, and you look at it and think, that might be best off for the open call, what would happen in that scenario?
So we reserve the right, and have in the past moved ideas between calls where we think it's useful to the spread, but it's very much a minority. I think we had a really good decarb proposal last year that came into the open call, and when we looked at the sort of the maybes that were near the line in the open call, it was just much better, and so we moved it across and we put it in there. So that can happen, and we reserve that right, but we certainly don't sort of plan to do that.
Great, okay. James, we're getting questions in really thick and fast here. I wonder if it's worth just going through, just kind of picking out.
Yeah, so I think we've done software solutions, haven't we?
Yeah. I think, do you want to take the ones more about the scope, and I'll take the ones about the application?
Yeah,
there.
Absolutely. It's a question about alignment with the industrial strategy. It doesn't have to be aligned with the industrial strategy, but that just gives you some sort of good instant fodder that you can use. These are all hooks. These are shortcuts for helping you understand what the challenges are from government's point of view. I think use whatever you can find. If you know and understand a real challenge, talk about it. We're interested. Hope that helps.
We've had a question here about what we would class as an SME. Usually speaking, we go with the EU definition of turning over 50 million euros per year and having 250 employees. So we will go with that definition.
Yeah, but of course we're not only offering the funding to SMEs. Please do big. Peter Everett has a startup microbusiness, doesn't have a bid writer. How can we help? Can we get help to write our bid? Are you offering any help with that, Rebecca? I know we've got obviously we've got a capacity limit somewhere. I think little stuff we'd probably be able to provide some pointers.
Yeah, we can. If we just have to, Peter, we'd have to sit down and kind of have a meeting where you could provide us with most of the content, and we could potentially help you in writing it up. Obviously, we can't complete it for you with the content, but so you need to provide us with what you want to say in it and what your project is, and yeah, we might be able to help. So if you contact me offline.
Yeah, I think we've tried to make the process as low burden as possible. We still need quite a lot of information. There's a balance there, but yeah, good luck, and please have a go.
James, my feeling is yes. Do you have to be a VAT registered company in order to apply?
Yeah, no, you don't have to be, but most people are. So I'm just trying to think of organisations that aren't VAT registered, like third sector organisations that you can apply. So there isn't an absolute requirement for VAT registration, no. Toby, the decarb slides. Yes, I'm afraid I raced through without talking to my decarb slides. Are we going to make those available, Rebecca? I think we'll have the recording.
Yeah, we are.
Okay, those will be available afterwards. It's pretty much stuff that I said. I don't think you'll find any diamonds in there in particular, but there were some nice pictures.
So yeah, on that, James, someone's asking about where they can view the recording, and it will be on YouTube. We will send the link after, and Nick will send it. An interesting one from Bernie. Can we use unspent funding to register for patents?
So was that, can we use the T-Trig funding for?
I assume so, yes.
IP costs. You could, if it was central to proving the concept. So £30,000 doesn't go very far when you start talking to IP attorneys and etc. etc. So I think an application that was dominated by IP costs wouldn't seem very good value for money. And it's in the application guidance how the assessment criteria, how we're going to look at these bids is all there for you. And I'd suggest you have a look there and then sort of look at what the shape of that project is and make a judgment for yourself. But it's it is part of the process. It's not really sort of core to T-Trig, but yeah, I think that's what I'd say.
James, on the scope, we've had a couple about drones, projects involving UAVs or drones in water, road and air. Are they in scope? Yeah,
absolutely. Love drones. Great technology. I think it's probably best for the open call, although I'm sure there's some great sort of labour saving or sort of larger vehicle use saving things you can do with drones. So I'm sure you can get it into decarb as well. Yes, please.
Okay. Can a university lead an application with a partner who is a large company? Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Would a solution to optimize construction and maintenance of transport infrastructure? Yes, it would be in scope, probably in the open call. Again, lots of condition monitoring, construction maintenance stuff can be decarb as well, if you can demonstrate that you're saving sort of vehicle usage, etc. So yes, absolutely. Is there a minimum maximum level of information you require to support applications? There's a maximum word count on many of the questions, but not all. In terms of a minimum, you have to explain what the idea is, why it's important, how you're going to put together a project. So yeah, that's the minimum. We have had applications in the past that are very scant on detail, and we've been left unsure what the idea was or what the project was, and we've had to discard them. So as long as you're explaining yourself, I think that's enough information.
We've had a question here about procurement, whether successful applicants can undertake competitive tenders with awarded fundings to select suppliers. I don't see why not, as long as I can do it within the time frame.
If you've got time, yeah. Yeah,
because it can take quite a bit of time, that's the only thing. But yeah, don't see why not. Because subcontractors are eligible, and consultancy, whatever it is. So whether you've got them lined up or not, I mean, it just depends how long you can get that lined up.
Yeah, I think with one slight word of warning with consultancy, consultants can be very expensive. So if you've got lots of expensive consultancy resource in a £30,000 project, it may not look like great value for money.
This is a really good question from Anonymous. What are you requiring as an outcome? A feasibility study, a prototype, a pilot deployment? Really good question. So feasibility study could be, yeah. Prototype, not necessarily. That would be slightly later stage, and also a pilot deployment, certainly later stage. This is early stage feasibility research. So this is your proof of concept, very much on paper. That will lead to the next stage of development, which will then be prototypes and pilots and things like that.
I might temper that slightly and say that sometimes we do have projects that go that little bit further. It depends. So certainly digital stuff you can develop and you can test really quickly. Physical stuff, it's a bit harder. I think in terms of an outcome, it's demonstrating that the concept works. So it might be those, but Bex is absolutely right. The focus is on the earliest stages.
That's a really good point, actually, Jane. Something I didn't actually think about is that if you have to develop the thing in the first place to be able to do the research on it, then yeah, you need to factor that in, that building of it first, sort of thing. So, I mean, so technically that would be prototype development. So it depends on the project.
Yeah, absolutely. Keith's asked about A-Trig. So the minister did announce A-Trig on the 14th when we had the launch. The actual mechanics of A-Trig are a little bit behind T-Trig. It will still happen, but there is a further set of announcements that are going to be coordinated around accessibility. And A-Trig, the accessibility portion of T-Trig, will be open, we think, in early November. X, is that right? But it's still not confirmed yet, so don't take that as gospel. But there will be funding because we've announced it. It's just a question of exactly when that will be open, but slightly later. And there'll be details on the CPC's webpage.
So we are maintaining this is quite echoey. Sorry. We are maintaining a list of people who are interested in A-Trig. So if you want to be kept informed of A-Trig development, you can email us at the T-Trig website, and we will add you to the list to make sure that you're kept informed. Susan's got a really interesting question. I've read it about 4 or 5 times, and I can't get my head around this question, James. It's the first one. It's the first one in the Q&A.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think, Susan, what you're saying is that you've got an existing technology and you want to use it in a new way. If you're using it in a new way, in a new context, doing something new with it, that's in scope. I think that's what you're asking. Hopefully that's covered it. If not, could you put another question in? But in principle, yeah, that is, within scope. A question from Anthony about how the funding works regarding co-funding. Is it 30k fully funded, and over that we need to contribute a certain percentage? So we're offering 30k. We can't offer you more than that for each idea. That's 100% funding, so you don't need match funding for that 30k. But if it is part of a bigger project and you're leveraging that 30k and doing something more ambitious, then great.
John is asking about if there is a limit to the number of pages for the uploads and support. Yes, there is a limit, and I can't remember for the life of me what that is, but you will be able to find out on the F6S website.
Awesome. Naomi, will it be funded? Will it fund an economic and environmental evaluation on a new transport mode? I'm not quite sure what the question asks, but if you're proving the concept of a new technology of some sort in transport that will help improve the transport system, it will be in scope. I think a sort of an economic analysis, if that's what you're talking about, probably wouldn't be in scope, but then again, it could be. I'd say hopefully that helps, but then refer to the guidance, and if that doesn't help, then please come back and ask us again.
Helen, sorry, just very, very quickly. The information is now on the sort of the link for the website is now on the slide there behind the main slide. So if you click on there, it's got all the information that you need about the program.
Keith has asked if he can take the same idea from T-Trig that may not have been successful and bid it into A-Trig. There's nothing wrong with that in principle. You may not have heard the outcome of your T-Trig bid by the time the A-Trig bidding closes, but you might be able to do that. So it'll depend on the timings, and of course it would have to be an accessibility idea, so it'd have to be eligible for both. But you probably can do that.
James, did you answer the question about patent filing? We've got one here. Using 10% of the project.
10%. Oh, we've got a bit more specific now. 10% is kind of on that boundary. So that feels okay, but it would depend on the rest of the project and what the money was going on, and sort of. I get that the kind of IP costs are expensive, and it's good to get help on them. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with that in principle, but it has to hold together as a cohesive project. Peter Everett, regarding offsetting, does zero carbon power generation technology that capture wasted power class as offsetting or not? So I think this is kind of regenerative, like regenerative braking into a battery or something like that. Yeah, it's absolutely decarbonisation, because you're using less fuel or you're pulling less electricity out of the electricity grid, or whatever you're doing. Yeah, definitely helps. Chris, potentially looking at innovative plastics to fuels project, especially for maritime. Yeah, that sounds eligible. So I talked a little bit about future carbon budgets and land use. One of the things there's going to be massive squabbling over, we think, is waste. At the moment, we put a lot of waste into landfill. We send some of it abroad, but it's going to become a really important resource at some point on the way to 2050. So absolutely, plastics to fuel technologies sounds great.
Okay, so this is interesting. If the project physically finishes within the 6 months, but due to the nature of it, the results can't be assessed for a while afterwards, it's more kind of a longitudinal project. How would we approach that? So
you have to, in the application, you have to plan out the project, right? So it needs a start, a middle, and an end, like every good story, and it needs a good endpoint to sort of measure the success of the project on. Lots of technologies need a long time, so 10 years, 15 years maybe, to really demonstrate their impact. So difficult to say. I think as long as it's a cohesive, coherent project in its own right within the 6 months, then that would be good. And longer term stuff, you know, everybody who's applying for funding will be going on a journey either with this idea or their next idea. So yeah, there's lots of things happen after the T-Trig grant. yeah, I hope that's a satisfactory answer.
Thanks, James. So another question from an anonymous attendee is they've been awarded some funding from an alternative source for 12 months, and they would like to apply for some T-Trig funding to help expand their current project into sort of like an offshoot parallel project. What do we think about that?
If it's a new idea and you can demonstrate a self-contained new idea and a self-contained piece of work, that's okay. Again, I think we'll want to know that you've got the resources to deliver both projects, and we do talk to Innovate UK and other funders as part of the due diligence on T-Trig. So in principle, it's okay as long as it's deliverable and as long as you can demonstrate that you've got that standalone project, and that if the first project goes wrong, how you're going to the sort of parent project, how you're going to manage the risk to your T-Trig.
So I suppose that's the similar question to just, can we apply to fund a spin-off innovation from an ongoing project? That answers that one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Have we still got Asha? Are you still with us, Asha? I appreciate you're probably using time to do other things. We've got many.
Yes.
Hi, Asha. Many COVID recovery innovations could have negative side effects and could make public transport more vulnerable, less resilient. Can examining this be the main purpose of a project?
So, James, I'm afraid I'm going to throw that straight back to you. It sounds more researchy. You know, is that within scope to fund research in that context?
Yeah. So actually, this isn't too. So this isn't this year. You're right. Actually, this isn't within the scope of things you've asked for. In fact, because it's not necessarily to do
it's
with.
Certainly interesting. I mean, certainly the department would like to see that, but it's up to you as to whether that falls within T-Trig scope.
Wowzers. So tricky question, Borian. no worries, Asha. If it's a piece of social research that doesn't feel like it's in scope, if you're proving the concept of some kind of technology, then it would be in scope. I can't quite tell from the question which way you're going with that.
I mean, I would just add to that it's definitely an innovation-focused call, right? So if you can prove an innovation element to it, and I suppose innovative techniques for understanding the impact of COVID could well be in scope. Prove the innovation, prove the kind of potential for exploitation, and that kind of answers a lot of the questions, I think.
Cool. Thanks, Asha. So hopefully, Borian, that's answered your question. Peter was asking about dual applications. What if we have multiple opportunities for adaptations of the same technology? If they're separate projects and separate ideas, yes, they could be separate applications. It might make you very busy filling out forms. So yeah, I think my suggestion would be to prioritize the ones that you think are the best, most impactful.
So we've had a question about whether the grant would cover the cost of market research to understand the market and customer better. Yes, absolutely. If that is an element of the project that's going to help you to arrive at a proof of concept, not if that is the project in its entirety, because that doesn't really have a commercialization prospect to it. So yeah, market research, yeah, always very important, very critical, as long as it's part of a wider picture.
Mark Spratt, how many projects on active travel do you anticipate funding? As many as possible is the very short answer to that. We big on active transport, and as Asha said, it is the easiest and cheapest way to decarbonise the transport system is to shift to active travel or to travel less. So yeah, very keen on active travel bids. We don't have a specific pot for active travel, but really interested in any bids there. Helen was asking about possible to learn more about previous winning bids and what their bid entailed. So on the gov.uk website, there is a list of all the past T-Trig projects. You can also see a set of one-page summaries if you Google T-Trig Innovation Showcase for an event we held in January 2019. There's one-page summaries of a number of ideas there from past T-Trig projects, that should help you. We can't share past bids as such, because they're in confidence, obviously. But between those two sources and doing the Googling, you should be able to find some ideas of what people have had money for in the past. Anonymous viewer asked, where will the technology be deployed? Asha, would you like to answer that? Have you grabbed that one?
I can certainly go for that, James. That really depends on, firstly, what kind of question you're answering with it. You know, is this going to be something you'd stick on a mode of transport? Is this something which should be, you know, nationally deployed? And the other side of that is, what does your exploitation route look like? So clearly we're funding the innovation, quite a low technology readiness level. It's highly likely you'd be looking at kind of innovation partners to drive that onto deployment kind of exploitation. So I guess the answer to that is really up to you. Anywhere on the transport sector is of interest and in scope.
Thanks, Asha. I assume that was a question about COVID. It seems most relevant there.
And James, I'll take this one if that's all right. Yes, we do have a Word version of the form, and if you would like to use that to help you sort of scope out your answers first and then copy them over onto the FTC platform, that is absolutely fine. We would encourage, where possible, you to use F6S. And if you're having sort of problems with it, I'm more than happy to sit down with you and go through any issues and help you use it. However, if you're really at the point that you really don't want to use it, that's absolutely fine. You're more than welcome to use our Word form and submit that. Please contact us at the T-Trig email, and we will send you the template over, and then just email it back to us. That's fine.
Yeah, they won't be disadvantaged if they come in on paper, even though it's slightly more work for us.
Yeah.
And finally, COVID-19 contact tracing app uses both Bluetooth to determine proximity, but a pathogen, all my screens gone black, could sit on surfaces. Would a solution that looks at movement trajectories be in scope? Asha, are you interested in solutions that, I guess it's movement of people or objects? Would you be interested in that?
Yeah, that sounds like the kind of thing which would be of interest. So I'm not quite sure what the answer would be around movement trajectories, but there is some research at the moment, which I believe has been published, that happened from the Royal Society modelling call, which is showing that movement of people can be a big driver of aerosol movement. So yeah, that's an interesting thing and worth submitting a bid on.
Thanks, Asha. We in 2017 we funded Vivacity to develop some smart cameras that have algorithms within a sort of a video camera that you mount in public places, and they were able to use in sort of March, April time. They were able to use their cameras. They had a software update, and they were able to use their cameras to measure social distancing live on streets where these things were deployed in Manchester, Bristol, Oxford, etc. And that data was used by DFT to help understand how lockdown restrictions were how effective they're being, how much people were complying. So yeah, absolutely, those cameras do exactly that, measuring trajectories of people, cyclists, etc., cars, and they were able to contribute to the response. I think we're out of questions.
Oh, we just so sorry. Somebody's just put two more
that's
in
right.
there. So.
Last orders at the bar.
Yeah.
Asha, someone's asked whether you can share the Royal Society COVID research you just referred to. Is that available online somewhere?
I don't know. I'm afraid I saw a presentation there. There was a seminar which might be available on the CIBSE website. That's the Chartered Institute for Building Services Engineering, where it was described, which I believe was recorded. I was a presenter at that, which is the first place I heard about it. So you might find it there. It's the RAMP 7 and CIBSE seminar. That's probably the best place to find it.
Thanks, Asha. There's quite a lot of stuff that the department gets that's sensitive around COVID. So if it's within that, then we won't be able to share it. I've had a question about from an anonymous viewer, feasibility study providing a new service which has a decarbonising element to city centre, which would ultimately use existing products. So if this is using an existing innovation in a new way, it would be in scope. If not, it would not be. Hopefully that's clear enough for that one. And Alex Butler, if an application does not succeed, presumably details will not be shown publicly. Absolutely, yeah. We don't share any details of unsuccessful applications. I think there might have been a subsequent question there about what is shown about successful applications. So we published the titles of the projects and the recipients of the grants as part of the normal process. And at the end of your T-Trig grant, we ask you to do a one-page summary, which we will compile into a record of that call, a la the 2019 document that I mentioned earlier. And you will also be asked to produce a final report, which we look to you to publish yourself, but which we provide release authority on to check that it's fully acceptable. And if there's anything that's particularly sensitive in there, either for security reasons, if you're delivering a security project, or commercial reasons, we'll ask you to do two versions: one that's redacted that you can then use however you want, and one that we hang on to that contains a record of what you've done for us with the money we've provided. Okay, I think that might be us.
So I guess it's just left to say thank you to everyone who's joined. I think it was a really great turnout. If you do have a few spare minutes, would you mind just going to the chat function at the bottom of the screen?